here to talk about some open source goodness with digital credentials. So I'll be spending the next 45 minutes basically giving an introduction of digital credentials, what we've been doing at Georgia Tech, and opportunities for you as stakeholders to contribute to and get involved with the project. So, who am I? My name is Dr. Eric Sembrat. I'm a research faculty member and a director of digital learning technologies for Georgia Tech's College of Lifetime Learning. We are the newest college of Georgia Tech. We're about 2 months old. I am centered within the Center for 21st Century Universities. You can think of that rather long unit name as an incubator and hub for educational technology. So, similar to what my department's name is, my interest in research lies at the intersection of educational technology and the sociocultural impacts and perspectives that intersect that. Just like with all of you, all the technology you have has decisions, whether it be the user interface you have, the buttons on your device, or the way your products work that are influenced by the culture and history that you're sitting inside of. So that's most of my work. If you want to learn more about me, the QR code on the bottom left goes to my personal website. The QR code on the bottom right goes to my work in the College of Lifetime Learning. And to be quite honest with you, I cannot remember for the life of me what the QR code in the top right goes to. I'm going to say it goes to LinkedIn, but I am not 100% positive. So, today I'm going to be focusing on 3 main pillars. First, I'm going to introduce digital credentials because it's a term that has, lots of different terminology used over the last decade and a half or so. Then I'm going to talk about the work that we at Georgia Tech and with the consortium of other higher ed institutions have done to build out microservices and all the development tools that we're probably here to learn about. And then 3, to talk about the work and initiatives that this consortium of higher education institutions are doing to move this platform and specification forward. So, I'm going to start by talking about what digital credentials are. And before I begin, does anyone know what a digital credential is? Anyone want to take a stab at a definition? Yes?
So we use one proprietary system that connects a lot of different subsystems between the organizations, or I'm close or not?
That's okay. You're not close, but that's okay. That's because, again, terminology for this product line, very confusing. Anyone else? Let me give you another hint. It fits within education and the goals you get out of education. Yes, in the back.
Is it like, when you graduate college, sometimes you get listed on these sites where it says like, this is so-and-so, and we verified that he graduated from this university and maybe got these certs or something.
You're on the right track. I love it.
Man, I was so far away.
That's okay. We put the words digital and credential there,
yeah.
And based on our background, we can likely all get different definitions. Some may be closer to what I'm talking about today. Some may be in entirely different methods. If you're, for example, maybe sitting more in cryptography or in deep software development, you're going to have a much different perspective and interpretation of this definition than I might have through educational technology. So, the big question, what is a digital credential? So I'm going to quickly, I cannot remember what that slide was. You know what, since I already did that. So the context that I give for asking you to define that for me is because educational technology and education has a historical best practice of using ambiguous terminology. So you've likely heard about this term before, but there are, I think, 6 or so terms I'm about to show you that all basically mean similar to the same things. So I'm going to cover what the heck a digital credential is, and then all the different subsets that fit underneath it. So here we are. We've got micro-credentials. Who's heard of micro-credentials? Anyone? What about badges? You've seen them, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. You see them in people's LinkedIn profiles. Digital badge. Some people refer to that for some godforsaken reason. OpenBadges.
Don't know that.
Alternative credentials. And then the overarching digital credential. All of these sound very similar, but yet they mean completely different things. The worst part is, most people actually refer to them synonymously. So they will replace digital credential for micro-credential, even though they mean 2 different things when you actually look at the terminology. So, since I am now sitting on the research faculty side, I wanted to stack them vertically to understand what the heck I'm talking about. At the very top is a digital credential. Oh, nice, I opened up my camera, that's not helpful. new iPhone. It has a new button that I just press all the time. It's useless to me. So, oh, I almost did it again. Good God. Let's try that again. Perfect. A digital credential is at a very high level. It has nothing to do with what you're assessing, the degree or accomplishment you're doing. It's merely a bucket that serves as a document of record and the security and protection all in one. Some people use the analogy of it is both the letter you place in an envelope and the envelope that you sign, seal, deliver. This can be as something as formal as a degree. It can be something as formal as informal as you sat in this room today and I want to give you all digital credentials for being physically here. In digital credentials world, it doesn't really matter. You are starting to see digital credentials for passports, digital IDs. We could theoretically say that your Delta ticket when you board on your app is a form of a digital credential there. When we look a little bit further down, the terminology that we hear a lot is both alternative credentials and micro-credentials. Alternative credentials refer to the kind of learning that takes place, focused on an academic setting for that non-degree kind of supplemental, complementary work that things like higher education does. You see this a lot with skills learning for some non-degree credit-bearing programs. We bundle those under the terminology of alternative credentials. We also refer to micro-credentials, which are specifically tuned to skills or competencies. How many of you have taken a micro-credential course for learning a skill? I count 1, I count 2, fantastic, and 2.5, 3 maybe. Awesome. So, micro-credentials, when you use the terminology correctly, is specifically for building competency or expertise in a skill, not of a major program. And then digital badge. This is the historical term that we saw back when Mozilla first built out the technical specifications for digital credentials. I'll actually get to the specification name in a second. But the digital badge is just the online representation of the accomplishment. It's historically used because the original version of the specification focused largely on the dadgum picture that's there. However, badges have both an image, which I like to refer to as the badge, and the underlying metadata. An image isn't going to tell you a whole lot about what someone did. It's all the other data underneath that's super important. And then OpenBadge. OpenBadge is the term that I heard in the audience was likely the most unfamiliar. It's the technical specification that talks about all the metadata that goes on with your learning experience. Your learning experience isn't just a degree. If you have, for example, a degree from an institution, it's not just whatever the program is that relates to the experience you've got. It's the courses you took, the projects you worked on, perhaps the extracurricular activities you did, whether you did a co-op, an internship, or all the sort of learning and student organizations that you got yourself involved with. That's all part of your degree, but yet that in an open badge, that metadata is the context that helps basically give the detail of the learning experience. Now, that's the whole hierarchy. Since we're talking about open badges, I do want to know that open badges has been around for a while. Mozilla, I believe, released version 1 perhaps in 2011 or 2012. Then it moved over to this EdTech conglomerate that was called IMS Global, that's now One EdTech, both very corporate names, but they managed to basically take hold of the specifications and build out development cycles to move the specifications forward. So this standard is the underlying metadata that has all that learning and success and accomplishment that exists there. Your badge is just the visual image, and I'm sure that's the part everyone's most familiar with. And that's pretty much what the standard's been for the last 15, 18 years or so. So, since Georgia Tech doesn't have digital credentials that are well matured right now, I'm going to use our friends at the University of West Georgia. This digital credential that sits on your screen is just the image, but it tells us something about what the digital credential stands for. Can anyone take a guess on what this digital credential is telling you?
You have an interdisciplinary certificate in data analytics.
Fantastic. And we know that it's organized not just within the University of West Georgia, which in this case is Go West UWG. If you don't know that, you're kind of shit out of luck. But it's codified within an organizational unit on campus, which may be helpful to some people, but perhaps if I'm in California, perhaps the Richards College of Business doesn't really help me a whole lot. And then the icon in the top left, does that give us context on some sort of information about that?
An education.
And there you go. It's an icon that they took from an icon library. They're wanting to represent some sort of educational rigor that exists there. I'm sure they use a bunch of different icons there, but the tip of the hat probably works out pretty well for that. So, underlying this image in one of two ways is all the nuts and bolts of a digital credential. It's either represented as a boatload of JSON sitting alongside the image. That means the image is just a representation, and all the JSON, the image is actually stored within the JSON as a parameter field, or the JSON's embedded within the image's metadata itself. It's very confusing because 99% of the time, people choose this route. Right now, there's not a lot of image editing or viewing tools like your phone images that do this. That will take a look at an image in your camera roll and tell you the digital credential metadata within it, which makes that method kind of not very helpful. And regardless of what path you go through with these, the security part, the part that your learner or the person who gained that digital credential isn't going in there and mucking it to change it to show a greater level of expertise than what they actually have. Now, I will tell you, I'm not a security expert. Cybersecurity is not my forte. I took maybe one class in college, and whenever I hear about cryptography and all the work that's going in there, above my head, completely above my head. But what I can tell you is the OpenBadges standard on the left-hand side is the specification standard that works with something that the W3C is working on with verifiable credentials. Verifiable credentials handles all of the cryptographic security and protection mechanisms that exist, serving as a great partner for sort of the modern age of digital credentials. So, at a very high level, what the W3C is focusing on for what digital credentials look like today is that there are three primary roles. Your issuer is like your institution, your authority of learning. Perhaps you, as someone who wants to deliver a evidence of learning or knowledge attainment in some area to someone called a holder. A holder is a learner, it's a student, it's an audience member. Those are the people that acquire, store, and then give out their digital credentials, which VCs here refers to the verifiable credentials, send it to a third-party service that's usually a web app sitting somewhere called a verifier that just sniffs all of the JSON that's there, makes sure everything looks correct, talks to the issuer's issue registry and makes sure everything looks golden, and then puts a big old check mark to make sure that it's validated. If you want to learn more about the verifiable credential specification, the QR code in the bottom right will get you there. I wish I could tell you I understand 100% of it. I'm going to show you a very scary infographic in like 3 slides that scares the living hell out of me because I don't understand all of it. But this is not a simple specification, but it's meant to encompass all the security layers that exist there, as well as all the services that make this sort of specification work. And so because I've been talking so much about terminology, I just defined those 3 main areas, but I just want to double check and provide a little bit more context on it because, as I mentioned at the start of this presentation, terminology is education's worst battle because we tend to reinvent the wheel a ton. So there's work going on within professional organizations. Acro has a learning employment record accelerator work where they're working to build out a standard definition to which One Ed Tech has been reflecting through some of their presentations. On the QR code on the left-hand side, they recently did a presentation at a conference earlier this year to help define that. I basically used these 2 sources to help define the terms and what's being used today. Issuers. Issuers are those creators and holders of the metadata to deliver to learners of a digital credential ecosystem. That can be someone as simple as all of you in the audience serving as personal digital credential issuers. But it can also be Georgia Tech. It can be an institution. They control whom they issue digital credentials to. And they issue it through really a process that likely has a lot of governance, best practices on top of it. But they issue it to learners, and that digital credential has the content describing the achievement that they've provided out and the details and metadata underneath that. Your holders, those are the folks that are in the audience today. Those are the learners that are receiving digital credentials. Historically, they have been received on a platform as a service app. So if you've heard Credly, you've heard Canvas Credentials or Badger, Accredible, Territorium, all of those historically have been the bearers of holding digital credentials for learners. With verifiable credentials, we have moved to actually allow and facilitate learners to hold their own digital credentials on their digital devices. So the phones that you're holding, the laptops that you're looking at, those are where those digital credentials should live, not on credly.com. And these are your learners. And then the verifiers. It's probably the weirdest thing because verifiers currently do not exist. They are the platform in the old specifications of OpenBadges that hold the learner's achievements as well. Verifiers are a new middleware service that serve really one big purpose, which is to sort of sniff the JSON that's there, all the cryptographic functions that are there, and ensure that everything matches what the hashes that exist within the JSON metadata point to. It verifies that the digital credential through the issuer, through something called a registry, hasn't been revoked. So let's say I'm a Georgia Tech student and I cheated throughout my entire undergraduate degree. I got my degree and then Georgia Tech decided to take it away because they knew I was up to no good. That's the revocation that they can do, and digital credentials through verifiable credentials facilitates that process. And then we're validating that the issuer has actually given out this digital credential to someone. So the verifiers serve a couple of different purposes, all alongside validating what's inside that JSON metadata. And so these are the ugly workflows that I'm going to show you. They're within the verifiable credential spec. I'm showing you them because there's a bunch of silly workflows that we need to think about, both from the perspective of what the audiences, these three different pillars do, in terms of issuing, presenting them to a verifier to make sure that it's there, the registry that's connected to the issuer that allows the validation and authorship to be validated there, as well as the holders being able to delete and transfer the work that's being done if they don't want to hold their digital credential from an institution any longer. If I have a digital credential that says that I know how to read picture books, perhaps that's not going to be helpful once I'm in the workforce because perhaps that doesn't apply to the work that I'm doing anymore. So, this is where vendors come in. Vendors, as I mentioned, historically have been all of that technical scaffold. They've served as the issuer framework and the issuer holders that serve as validators and buckets for learners to hold their digital credentials in. However, not really a fan of that, because once you get outside of a particular digital credential vendor, then you have that weird issue where you have three different accounts on Canvas Credentials or Badger, Credly, and Accredible, all serving digital credentials of the same flavor, just from different organizations. This is where digital wallets come in. There's not a lot of vendors that are doing it today, but digital wallets are starting to replace that storage that traditionally has been within the vendor ecosystem. And then finally, vendors sort of fill in that last mile problem for incorporating it into educational software such as learning management systems, or in this case, content management systems. The same way that I could issue a digital credential through a learning experience, such as through Canvas or Desire to Learn or any of the other large learning management systems, I can do so also on Drupal. There's not a whole lot of difference underneath that, except it needs that last mile integration there. So, the biggest issue that I've encountered with this ecosystem is that it really isn't that friendly to open source contributions. A lot of it has been focused on sort of the initial specification work, and vendors have served as that sort of playground to give that one-stop shop solution. However, with verifiable credentials and W3C's work on a version 3 spec, there's an opportunity for bundling these microservices in tinier buckets of user roles and personas that these individual units play, to develop them and have them on hand for folks to use on learning management systems or content management systems. And that's where the work that Georgia Tech has done with Digital Credentials Consortium has been very helpful, that have open source tools for each and every one of you to play with today. What is the Digital Credentials Consortium? We are a collection of higher education institutions across the Americas and Europe that are focused on you know what? I think the focus on is on the next slide. The QR code in the bottom right will go to the website. This consortium is housed through MIT. Georgia Tech is a founding member of this, and we've had the awesome opportunity to help build this scaffold since, I think, 2018. I think the next slide might give a number on that. Yes, it is 2018. So, the Digital Credentials Consortium was founded with a mission towards building portable, verifiable digital academic credentials in higher education through having open source technology development to make sure that institutions can incorporate digital credentials into their tech stack, because you know every higher education institute is doing their own thing, just slightly different, and having that sort of customization allows for institutions to build this within their ecosystem and their workflow. And then working through leadership, research, and advocacy. Those are the 3 things that I'm doing. So, now that I've introduced the DCC, I'm going to talk about how we do development with microservices, tools, and standards. So, the W3C has a framework that I find incredibly exhausting, very complex, and I don't want to build this from the entirety of what the verifiable credentials spec should be doing. Why? Because it's exhausting. This ugly diagram that I did not draw, do not blame me for this, is the deconstruction of the verifiable credentials spec into the various components that need to be implemented for you to leverage the 3 major stakeholders that exist. At a very high level, each of the 3 audiences have coordinators and services that sit and do very specific things that talk to one another. And then we have administrative interfaces or web apps that serve these different use cases. But all of these need to be developed if we're going to play with one of these, ideally in very similar ways, since they do very specific things through verifiable credential standard. When I see this workflow, I get angry, because it's a lot, and I don't want to do this over and over again. I don't want to see higher education build this from the ground up every time they want to do something. There's opportunity with open source to repurpose and build out microservices that do piecemeal parts of this. So if an institution wants to serve as an issuer, they just need to issue all the issue coordinators and services to do the things that need to be done. If they just want to build, for example, a mobile wallet, holders are a great place for them to build that. And then sort of serve as connectors to ambiguously defined verifiers and issuers that exist somewhere in the ecosystem. And I mentioned this, but education has the tendency to build things from scratch because they don't like something that exists in the totality of it, how it works. We've seen this with custom-built learning management systems, forks of open source tools that end up getting stale and fragmented as they forget to pull in code from the parent project. And we have enough historical and anecdotal evidence to know that these don't work in the long haul. There's an opportunity for building out smaller piecemeal components that we can plug and play into the websites that we build. So for example, a Drupal website that's delivering digital credentials may not need to serve as a holder or a verifier. It just may need to be an issuer that builds out all the issuing capabilities that exist and leave it to the other parts of the organization or an open source project or a vendor's tool to handle the storage of a digital credential somewhere. So, since the DCC focuses on building those reusable modular components, that helps ease that cliff of building all these different services for when you want to play with a particular component of verifiable credentials. Historically, the work with the DCC has developed those microservices to sort of help scaffold those individual pieces of what verifiable credentials spec does. But recently, the Digital Credentials Consortium had sort of facilitated that not every university or organization is built the same. Developers may be different between units. For example, Kevin and I both work at Georgia Tech. Kevin and I as developers likely have a skill set that is different than all the other developers at Georgia Tech. You cannot assume that you can plug and play one individual to another within an organization and get the same result. So, the Digital Credentials Consortium basically took the interconnectivity of those microservices together as the next logical step, which is, what if we give a framework, a starting point for how an institution or an organization can take all these microservices, combine them together in a pot of stew, and deliver something in harmony without a whole lot of work to get started. And that's where the Digital Credentials Consortium's recent work with the admin dashboard fits within this. The admin dashboard is really just a web app that sort of connects all the different ingredients and provides a starting point for an organization to deliver verifiable credentials out of the box. It has those simple things like user management, credential management, the ability to batch issue digital credentials, the ability to put a template both for the emails that you send out to your learners as well as templates of the verifiable credentials you want to do, and provide a place for holders or learners to both claim their digital credential via a page and work with external services such as VC API. That very small QR code in the bottom left serves as a link to that specification. I can tell you right now, I don't know a daggone thing about it. I know it exists, but it's not my strength to figure out where that is. The QR code in the top right will take you, I think, to the correct repository for the admin dashboard. So, oh my God, this contrast, get out. Okay, this icon says Georgia Tech, if you can't read it. I should have known this would have let me down. This is what I get for finding the first Google result for Georgia Tech. So what are we doing at Georgia Tech? Well, so historically, we have worked with dog fooding and building out our own digital credentials platform because we are education. Learn from our mistakes. Do not build things from the ground up without having institutional buy-in from an organization or a larger body. So we built this legacy application called CreditMin. It largely was an API server that served to issue digital credentials back when they were blockchain credentials. And then we just basically sort of went in, put a fresh coat of paint on it, and converted it from blockchain to verifiable credentials that the W3C was working on when it was in draft specification. We use this as issuances as part of campus development work, so we focus this through a research lens. What does it look like at a course and program level, trying to understand the user experience of learners. That's great from a research standpoint. It stinks when you think about it from an institutional standpoint. If I want to give this to each department or organization on campus, this is the Wild West. That's unattainable for higher education where the learning experiences are likely different for every issuing organization. So we are moving to admin dashboard and modernizing our research scaffold in fall of 2024. It hasn't happened yet. I'm hopeful that because we have a month and a half left of fall 2024, we will have that before the December break. If you want to look at what CreditMin has been done, the QR code in the top right will work on that. Again, it's based historically in some of the work that we've done in block search, but as time has gone on, we've realized it doesn't really scale that well. And more importantly, with the advent of admin dashboard and user access, we can actually facilitate sort of giving different roles, for example, building out digital credentials en masse and delivering them to the stakeholders that are there. And then so VCLTI, we built out a learning tools interoperability tool. An LTI, an educational technology, is just a software standard that allows third-party modules, services, features to be incorporated in a safe manner within learning management systems. So we built out a proof of concept that allowed us to incorporate learning experiences within our digital credentials work. And this allowed instructors to, for example, put it as a part of their educational course design or within the learning management systems that we use on campus. Because this was built for pilot and experimental use cases, it needs lots of modernizations. There's lots of changes that have happened since we developed this, a more standard API scaffold, and then sort of working out with what the real case of digital credentials governance works with, now that the ecosystem in higher education is starting to slow down a little bit on innovation within digital credentials. So, OpenBadges, the admin dashboard provides this first step for building out a digital credential, and it's a giant text box that allows you to build out a digital credential with JSON. That's great for my developer. It's not so great for for example, the instructional designers, the faculty instructors, the student assistants, the administrative assistants. All these folks where perhaps the technical knowledge or even understanding of what JSON is or how to build out a digital credential perhaps are not really well defined for them. And it's not really ideal for figuring out how a digital credential badge can be represented. I am not about to ask a non-technical user to convert an image to base64 to put it in JSON. That is a silly idea and ripe for someone to mess that up. So, how do we fix this with the experimental place that we have? Well, on short term, I wanted to fix something yesterday to enable this research opportunities to continue to happen without having to have my developer do all the work that needs to happen. Long term, taking those short and incremental gains, I want to take those fixes back into admin dashboard, realizing that I can't do that overnight. So, a little caveat here. Before I moved into educational technology, I spent the last 12 years working in Drupal. So Drupal served as a fantastic scaffold for this. Why? Because it has a well-defined content management system architecture that is so much easier than something like WordPress. It allows me to repurpose and host things like images and metadata using the structures that already exist without having to, for example, install advanced custom fields on WordPress or working within WordPress's API or plugin structure. Drupal just makes it through entity and field configuration so much easier. And how could I say no to that for a problem that I'm trying to solve, largely being an authorship problem? And I love to say it, but Drupal works for authorship, especially when you have structured data, which if I have a JSON standard specification, structured data works great within that. And I have to admit, I love the way that Drupal does entity management and even web forms nowadays. Finding the standards there work out well for me to build out digital credentials and have them parse out export as a OpenBadges v3 for the tools that I'm using. So, Drupal allows us to build custom entity types without reinventing the wheel. I'm facilitated by the standard field API to build out those entity value stores and push them into something like a PHP object that I can then leverage Symfony for building out some JSON output without having to build it all from scratch. And it makes it really great because it allows me to go with quick iterative cycles in a research context in sort of proof of concept, low fidelity to higher fidelity as I take in more specification and features, knowing that all my Drupal website needs to do is convert a pretty entity type into some JSON output that I can provide to admin dashboard. And where Drupal's great for this are things like media, so I can repurpose images that exist. Taxonomy, so I can have faculty not reinvent the wheel and create 5 different terms when they mean to say course. I can use things like text, integers, date, time, so that I have a standard way for folks to put in the kind of metadata that I need to work with. And then, for structured metadata that is well defined and has some specific standards there, I can use some entity bundling. In this case, paragraphs has always been the most attractive option for me by ease of use and scalability there for building out those sub-entities. In OpenBadges v3, the sub-entities that exist are things like criteria. What were you assessed by? How were you assessed? What framework did you use, if you did? And then alignments. If you're looking at different methodologies for learning design, what do those look like when looking at the standard bodies that exist or creating custom entities if you have those, for example, within your organization? Paragraph service is a great way to do that because I can repurpose ones that already exist or create my own custom ones if I'm, for example, an organization that has maybe some dog-fooded recommendations or standards that exist there. So those reusable entities are super important. I do not want to have everyone uploading an image and creating the same image over and over on my website if I don't have to. In the same way with taxonomy, I want to keep it simple and allow for that repurpose. I also want to allow for that flexibility that exists with the use cases that go there. Likely, educational audiences are going to have one flavor of, for example, alignments, whereas perhaps Technology companies that are looking to build out internal building or competency through certificates or professional development likely are going to use different external standards than what you'll see at Georgia Tech, which is okay. Paragraph serves as a great way to allow that customization between those audiences. And that allows me to take these, in this case, Pokemon-related digital credentials that I use as a starting point, all the metadata that I copy and paste it into there, and then build out a JSON output that allows me to, for example, convert an image in media to base64 if I don't want to have the image living on that website forever. And this allows me to build out something that can have something set up within a week or so for research purposes, which is fantastic, and what Drupal is great for. So, why do I love Drupal other than the fact that I'm a longtime user? The low operating cost for us is super helpful as an organization and for spinning up development. I never wanted to even think about WordPress because of the current state of the API and largely the ecosystem that exists. But Drupal's well-defined core and contrib specifications for that serve as a great starting point for this. And, as I mentioned, the flexibility in building out content organization, content auditing and moderation, as well as just generally authoring of well-defined structured data doesn't have a lot of equal in the CMS space for me. And that allows me to frame the work that I'm doing through a methodology called design-based research. So I'm going to put on my researcher hat and say what this is great for is it allows me to basically build out quick design sprints towards the creation of educational technology. This is just rapid prototyping with an educational spin on it. The focus and understand is the educational underpinnings of it. Define, conceive, build, and test are just the iterations you're doing. And all those silly little lines and arrows that you likely can't see are the ability to stop at any point and go back to refresh and iterate super quickly. And that allows Drupal to do these 4 things after I understand the soft skills parts and use Drupal to basically quickly iterate over all the work that I'm doing towards a well-functioning solution with a sample size of 1 developer that largely has like 20% of my time to development nowadays. So it's a fantastic opportunity for me to quickly build these out and have the evidence to then, for example, write research about it or talk about the methodology of rapid prototyping and iterative development towards the understanding and implementation of the OpenBadges specification. So, Georgia Tech and the Digital Credentials Consortium are just getting started. The Verifiable Credentials specification through the W3C was formalized earlier this year, if not late last year, and OpenBadges V3 was finalized this last summer. So, through the new formation of Georgia Tech's College of Lifetime Learning, this allows for us to play a lot, both with the development and modernization of digital credentials, as well as publishing the technical parts of it out into the world. One thing about educational research that really is the most difficult thing is that educational researchers typically don't talk about how you actually design and develop something. They call it easy. They call it straightforward. They call it a menial task to do. From your smiles, or you're shaking your heads, or you're just crying at your desk, you know that's not true. As developers, your work likely takes more than a quick iterative process, and you're likely having to move up and down through strategic and intentional work that you're building out within your tools because those decisions matter. Talking about how we implement something like this from a design and development standpoint is super important because beyond sharing the work that's done, you want to be able to also allow other folks to extend and build and validate the work that you've done. So, that's where we're taking to a next step is taking all this wonderful work we've done and using Drupal as a bit of a scaffold to get started quickly to move forward. So, since I've talked about the future from Georgia Tech's standpoint, I do want to pivot just slightly for my remaining time and talk about what we're doing through the Digital Credentials Consortium. So the first thing we're doing in Verifiable Credentials and the OpenBadges V3 spec, there is this strange quandary where issuers now have something called a registry. That is nothing more than a ledger that sits and provides a well-defined way of checking if a digital credential exists within that issuer and the status that exists there. in a federated model where likely everyone has an issuer registry somewhere, finding out where those registries that serve to consolidate down all the issuers that exist. It's going to be an ecosystem that is more like a zoo. You're going to have individual places where higher education, where K-12, where state, local, regional levels are going to have registries that may do the same thing, but one of the pitfalls of verifiable credentials and OpenBadges v3 is that registry standardization is not as far along as we would like from a standard. That being said, the DCC has partnered with an organization called Credential Engine to attempt to sort of mitigate this. While we're early in adoption of OpenBadges v3, look at issuer registries and build out standardization models so that there is equity when you're building out a digital wallet to go in and make sure that you can import digital credentials no matter what the issuer registry an issuer is associated with. So for example, Georgia Tech is a part of an issuer registry through the Digital Credentials Consortium. That's great for higher education, but if we have digital wallets towards professional development, there may be a clash there based on the needs and expectations that exist there. Getting as quickly ahead as we can on this allows us to mitigate those issues there as we formalize some of these auxiliary parts of the technology, and allows us to build things like interoperability, trust, and transparency. Those are loaded terms, but mean a lot when you're talking about showing validations of educational experiences. Secondly, we also want to validate and build out a standard operating model for degrees. Who has ever framed a degree on a wall? Okay, lots of you. You know that those degrees have a pretty standard look. They have a pretty standard model. If you have something that's drastically different, it may not be conceivably understandable if you have that presented somewhere in your office or at home if it doesn't follow that visual schema. The same for degrees as an open standard. Right now, OpenBadges v3 and verifiable credentials as a specification is very lax on formalized learning experiences like a degree, where institutions may have different, flavors, journeys that go through a degree, but what's on that daggum degree is likely going to be the same no matter what institution you come from. So building off some of the standard and early work that McMaster University has done with e-diplomas, looking at how to build out a specification model specifically for higher education and educational units to build out, for example, a digital credential that can generate a PDF that looks exactly like the degrees you have on your wall or in a closet or in your basement or at your office. As well as sort of having that assistive tool so you don't have to go to a vendor whenever you want to create a digital credential PDF from a digital credential standard. So we're starting this work based off of some of McMaster's e-diploma work, which they basically have been working very hard to build out the presentation layer, the conversion of metadata into a PDF standard, and the DCC is working to basically work on making that more widely applicable to audiences as a whole. So, with 1 minute left, if you want to get involved, there's an opportunity to join the Digital Credentials Consortium and help shape the future of education in terms of digital credentials. The giant ass QR code on the right will give you more information about how to join and the opportunities that exist there. But as we extend this effort, we're focusing on collaborative projects and sort of the mirroring of individual institutional priorities based on where they are within that digital credential journey to help build out both the technical experience and leadership within the consortium members that exist. So if you have any questions, you're welcome to reach out to me at any point. I'm happy to answer any questions I might have. Otherwise, oh God, where did these QR codes go? So, obviously, the ones on the right go to the LinkedIn profiles for myself and the consortium as a whole. I would suspect the ones on the left, I believe the one next to my name is a contact card because it's so small. And the QR code to the left of the Digital Credentials Consortium will go to the website. If you have questions, you're feel free to take a look at this, and I'm happy to answer any questions at this point. Otherwise, thank you very much. And we're at time for lunch, so any questions? Neither did I until I started this job, so it makes you feel any better.
I didn't know we did.
All right, and with that, I leave you to lunch. I think we go out front, perhaps, and where the T-shirts are. Perhaps there will be food waiting for us. If not, I'm sorry. Thank y'all.
Sorry.